I remember the feeling first, that peculiar kind of stillness that isn't quite silence, but something hovering just beneath it. It was the kind of quiet that presses against your ears softly, like a distant hum you almost don't notice, but can't quite ignore. That's how I felt as the bus rolled slowly through the narrow roads of Eastern Europe, winding through thick woods and low hills, until the silhouette of the village finally appeared on the horizon. The sun was already warm, the sky a soft blue streaked with faint clouds, and the air smelled faintly of earth and wild flowers. I had no real plan when I stepped off the bus at the village's lone stop. Just curiosity, a backpack full of essentials, and the vague hope of finding something worth remembering. A place of the usual tourist maps untouched or forgotten, where time might move differently. What struck me immediately was how alive the village felt, even though nobody seemed particularly hurried. Stone cottages with mossy roofs lined cobblestone paths, a small market square with a lone fountain that murmured quietly. The villagers themselves moved slowly, deliberately, exchanging soft words in a language I couldn't catch, but with smiles that felt strangely warm, almost too measured. As I walked through the village, the scent of wood smoke and baking bread mingled with the faint tang of wild herbs from nearby gardens. Children played in the distance, but their games were muted, the laughter soft and brief. It was as if the village existed in a gentle bubble, wrapped in calm, almost serene in a way that felt unnatural. I found a small inn near the square, a weathered sign swinging slightly in the breeze, with faded lettering I barely deciphered. Inside, the wooden beams creaked under the weight of time, and the hearth glowed softly with embers. The innkeeper, an older woman with deep-set eyes and a slow smile, welcomed me without question, her voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome, traveler," she said, her accent thick but soothing. "You will find our village peaceful. But remember, noon is the hour we all must rest." Her words were gentle, but carried an odd weight, like a warning wrapped in kindness. I nodded, intrigued but unsure what she meant. The villagers seemed to move toward their daily rituals with quiet precision. Curtains drawn, doors carefully latched, and clocks ticking down towards something unseen. When I asked about the noon rest, the innkeeper simply shrugged. "It is tradition," she said. "We all sleep at noon. It keeps us safe." That night, as I settled into my small room overlooking the square, I found myself thinking about the strange customs I had witnessed. The clocks throughout the village all ticked slowly toward midday. The air was calm, but I could feel a subtle tension underneath, as if the whole place was holding its breath. The next morning, I woke to birdsong and soft light filtering through the window. Outside, the village began its slow rhythm once more. People moved with careful intent, preparing for the day. As the sun edged closer to noon, I wandered the streets with my camera, eager to capture the essence of this peculiar place. And then, just as the clock struck 12, something happened that I could never have prepared for. Without warning, the villagers paused mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-breath. Their eyes fluttered shut, Faces relaxed into expressions of deep sleep, and their bodies slumped gently to the ground or leaned quietly against walls and door frames. The marketplace, once softly alive with motion, became a tableau of frozen dreams. It was like the entire village had been paused, caught in a shared slumber no one could break. I stood there blinking in disbelief, the camera heavy in my hands. I called out softly, but there was no response, just the steady, gentle breathing of dozens of sleeping souls. The warmth of the sun seemed to deepen, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, while everything else grew utterly still. For a long moment, I was alone, truly alone in a world that should have been bustling. I moved carefully among them, careful not to wake anyone. It was both beautiful and eerie. Faces serene, some cradling a sleeping child, others resting against a bench or sitting cross-legged on the steps of an old stone church. Then something odd caught my eye. In the corner of my camera's viewfinder, I glimpsed a flicker of movement, just a brief shifting shadow, something dark slipping between buildings and disappearing behind a low wall. I lowered the camera and looked myself, but saw nothing, only the village frozen in dream. Heart pounding, I raised the camera again, and that flicker returned, slow and deliberate, as if someone or something was watching from the edges of the sleep. The sun climbed higher, noon passed, but still no one awoke. I realized the villagers would remain trapped in that suspended moment until the clock ticked forward again, some unseen force holding them fast. I felt a chill creeping up my spine as I walked back to the inn, my mind racing. Why did they all sleep at noon? What was this strange quiet? And what was that shadow slipping through their dreams? The innkeeper met me in the dim hallway, her eyes softer now, but still carrying that strange warning. "You saw it," she said simply. "I did," I replied, voice barely a whisper. "There are things here," she said, "things between the moments we live. Noon is when they come close." I swallowed hard. That night I sat by the window, watching the village once again prepare for its rest. The clock ticked down, slow and certain, and when the hour came, the world folded in on itself, a village asleep and something watching in the dark. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. I found myself drawn deeper into the village's slow, deliberate peace. Each morning I wandered the streets, capturing quiet moments, the way the sunlight sifted through twisted branches, the soft murmur of the fountain, the delicate patterns carved into wooden shutters. Everything seemed ordinary, except for the inevitable pause at noon when life simply ceased and the village sank into that shared, unnatural sleep. Curiosity gnawed at me. I asked questions, carefully, quietly. Most villagers offered little more than gentle smiles or polite silence. A few whispered strange phrases, warnings cloaked in half-smiles. "Do not disturb the rest," one elderly man said, eyes clouded but steady. "The watcher comes when we sleep." At first, I thought it was some kind of superstition, a quaint local legend, the kind you find in isolated places with old traditions. But then I started to notice odd details that didn't fit. The village was oddly empty outside those sleep hours, as if people avoided being outside when awake. Doors and windows were barred, shutters closed tight well before noon. The streets grew silent, not just because everyone slept, but because no one dared move too freely. One afternoon, while filming in the square, I caught sight of something strange. Between two cottages, where shadows pooled thick, a figure slipped quietly, tall and thin, its movements slow and deliberate, not quite human. It vanished before I could focus, leaving only the faintest ripple in the air behind. I played back the footage, eyes glued to the screen. The shape flickered again, dark, shifting, watching. But every time I looked up, the village lay perfectly still, the people caught in their deep, dreamless sleep. I began to ask the innkeeper more about this watcher. She told me that long ago the village was cursed by a presence that came at midday, forcing everyone into sleep to protect themselves. The watcher, she said, was the shadow that roamed during the rest, an entity neither fully part of this world nor the next. "Why don't you leave?" I asked her one evening. Her eyes were sad, distant. "Because the village is bound, and sometimes those who leave do not return." The warmth of the village felt colder now, as if beneath its peaceful surface lurked something watching and waiting. I felt watched too, shadows brushing the edges of my vision, strange sounds echoing in empty alleys. Every day I filmed more. Every night I watched the village prepare for sleep, their faces peaceful but unknowable. And every noon, as the clock tolled, they all slipped away, and the watcher emerged. That night I did something I hadn't dared before. I set my alarm for 5 minutes before noon, and I let myself fall asleep. I wanted to know what they dreamed of, what the watcher saw, what it fed on. Lying there on the inn's creaking mattress, curtains drawn, I let my eyes close and drifted toward the bell's distant echo. And then something strange happened. I didn't wake in the inn. I was outside, standing in the village square, but the colors were wrong, too pale, faded like an old photograph left out in the sun. The villagers stood all around me, but not asleep. They were frozen in place, faces blank, eyes open but lifeless. Their mouths moved, but no sound escaped. It was like they were trying to speak, to warn me. Then I saw myself among them, standing awake, holding my camera, filming them. I turned in this dream space and saw the watcher, closer than ever. Not a shadow anymore, but something with the outline of a man and the texture of smoke, its face flickering like a flame, struggling to stay lit. It reached out to the me that held the camera, and I felt its fingers brushing across my chest. I woke gasping, heart pounding, skin cold with sweat. The camera lay beside me, untouched, but the battery had drained completely. I checked the time. 12:07 p.m. The next day, I wandered past the bakery and spotted the boy sitting on the steps, blinking slowly, like he'd just woken from a long nap. He looked wrong, not in any monstrous way, but his face seemed older than it should, his eyes glassy, like he wasn't entirely there. "You're awake," I said softly, kneeling near him. He blinked again, slow and deliberate. "It's not supposed to know your name," he whispered. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" The boy tilted his head. "It only watches. It never chases, unless it hears a name." "Who told you that?" His gaze shifted over my shoulder. "You did." When I turned to look, no one was there. And when I turned back, the boy was gone. Later that afternoon, I wandered past the village's northern edge, a boundary that seemed more like suggestion than law. Beyond the final row of stone houses lay fields swallowed by thistle and overgrowth. I found ruins half buried in the earth, old foundations choked with moss, a broken pillar or two. Near one wall was a faded fresco barely visible beneath grime and vines. I cleared it gently with my sleeve. It showed a figure, tall and black-eyed, arms extended as if to cover a village beneath its wings. Around its feet, people lay sleeping. Not dead, not alive. Sleeping. Beneath the painting, worn into the stone in a forgotten script, was a single recognizable symbol. Infinity. It wasn't just a curse. It was a cycle. And they were still in it. The days blurred together in the village's slow rhythm, but the weight of its secret pressed heavier on me. I felt like an intruder caught between waking and dreaming, a man on the edge of something vast and unknowable. One evening, I found myself drawn again to the innkeeper. Her eyes, usually soft, were shadowed with something deeper, regret, perhaps, or fear. "Tell me," I said quietly, "what exactly is this watcher? Why does the village sleep at noon?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Long ago, before a memory of darkness came to this place, it fed on our waking hours, on our fear and unrest. The elders found a way, a bargain made with the shadow. At noon we all sleep, and the watcher feeds on our dreams, not our lives." I shivered. "It's like a protection." "Yes," she said, voice barely more than a breath, "but a heavy price." That night, unable to resist, I set out with my camera as the clock began to chime noon. The village fell silent and still once again, the familiar calm overtaking everything. The watcher appeared, moving like smoke between buildings, its form shifting and dark. I followed, heart pounding, through empty streets and alleys. It led me to the edge of the village, where twisted trees crowded close, their branches like gnarled fingers reaching toward the sky. There, in a clearing, the watcher paused, its shape flickering between shadow and something almost human. I raised my camera, and the lens caught more than I expected. Eyes glowing faintly in the gloom, staring straight at me. A low, chilling sound echoed, a whisper, a warning. I stumbled back, breath ragged. The watcher turned toward me, its form stretching and shifting, and for a moment I was certain it could see me. I lowered the camera, breath shallow. This wasn't just a village with an odd custom. It was a place trapped between worlds, caught in a fragile balance I barely understood. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat by the window, watching the village breathe in the moonlight, the streets empty but alive with whispers only I seemed to hear. As I returned to the inn, a figure emerged from the alley near the square, a man I hadn't seen before. Tall, thin, with a faded coat and distant eyes. "You've stayed too long," he said. "It knows your name now." I swallowed. "What does that mean?" He took a step closer, face pale in the moonlight. "It remembers those who don't forget, and it follows what it remembers." He pressed something into my hand, a small talisman made of braided hair and bone, strung on a faded red thread. "Wear this when you leave. It may not stop it, but it may confuse it." Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness. The next day I packed my things. I knew I couldn't stay another night. I had to leave before the next noon, before it found me again. But I was slow. The road out of the village twisted longer than I remembered, the trees crowding tighter than they had days before. And then the bell began to toll. 12, 12, 12. I froze. The sound rang through me like a chime from inside my chest. I looked back and saw it. The watcher was standing in the open now, no longer slipping between shadows. It was whole, a tall, rippling void shaped like a man, but with no face. Just two pinpoints of dull, pale light where eyes might have been. It began to move, not walking, not gliding, stretching. Its limbs elongated, its body unfolded like smoke unraveling. And in the distance, I heard the sound of something ancient exhaling. I ran. The world around me slowed. My feet felt thick. My heartbeat thundered in my skull. And then I crossed the village boundary. Everything snapped back. The watcher stood at the threshold. It did not follow, but it watched. It's been 3 months. I left the village behind. I flew home, buried the footage on an old hard drive, tried to forget, but I can't. Every day at noon I feel it, a heaviness behind my eyes, a slow, crawling pull towards sleep. It's not just exhaustion, it's something else. Sometimes when I nap at midday, I dream of cobblestone streets, of quiet fountains and shuttered windows, of glowing eyes behind the curtains. The watcher didn't stay in the village. It followed me. I've tried telling people. Online forums, vague posts, cryptic warnings. One message caught my eye. A stranger replied from a completely different country. He wrote, "I visited that place too, or one just like it. Noon is no longer safe for me either." I don't know how many of us there are now, People who've seen it. People who carry a piece of that sleeping village with them. All I know is this. If you ever find yourself in a quiet place where time moves slower than it should, and the bells begin to toll at noon, don't fall asleep, and whatever you do, don't let it learn your name.